Okay, hopefully we've resolved this slight technical issue, which we were trying to help by not doing that with feedback between our two laptops, but end up getting the better of me. So back to what I was saying. So Julien de Salaberry, CEO and founder of Galen Growth. Warm welcome to everyone who's joined us today for this webinar. Galen Growth is the world leader in digital health data and insights firm, and we have Health Tech Alpha, which is the platform that we've built, which is the largest and deepest catalog of digital ventures across the world. Some almost 16,000 digital ventures on our platform, with data library for each venture that's unequaled. We have offices in Singapore for Asia Pac clients, in Basel, Switzerland for our European clients, and in Chicago, US for our US clients. We have built a taxonomy that is now regarded as best in class, which defines digital health and allows us to screen in or screen out any digital venture we come across. And this is the basis of our analysis today. So today's focus is the European digital ecosystem with an emphasis on the key markets. So that's usually mostly the Western countries of Europe. It is a biannual report, so it's one that we publish every July for the half year and every January for the full year. So today it is the full year 2022 that we're reporting on, and it is an excerpt of the free to download report that is available on our website at galengrowth.com/research, and you can download for free and get the full 60+ pages of unmatched insights for your own use and decision making. Scope of analysis, as usual for us, is that the digital venture needs to have been incorporated after the year 2002, needs to be private, and needs to be, obviously in this particular case, founded in a European country. With me, as usual, our head of research for Europe and North America, Dr. Sara Schmachtenberg. Sarah, welcome. And thank you once again for sparing the time to bring to life the data that you have analyzed and structured into this report. Let's start with a quick look at the global status of digital health funding in 2022, largely really just to anchor us back as to what did the global picture look like in 2022 versus previous years, but more importantly, of course, then be able to relate what's happened in Europe to those previous years.
Gladly, Julien. Good to be here. Thank you for all who are joining us. And we look forward to showing you a little bit about what happened in 2022 in the European ecosystem. So first off, the global context. I think you probably wouldn't be here if you haven't heard all the headlines, seen the headlines about the decline in venture funding in digital health in 2022. Yes, very much is the case. It's what we also reported with globally going from 2021, starting in the second half of 2021, that pandemic relief funding spree going through 2022. And 2020 going through 2021 and coming down again in 2022. The US, of course, takes the cake as far as the main share of the funding there. Europe, what you see is the blue bar there. Europe didn't do so bad in 2022. We'll see how that continues in 2021. But globally, we saw about a 41% decrease in venture funding in digital health. Europe, in fact, that number was closer to 12%. So actually fared the storm a little bit better than the rest of the ventures. We'll see if that's just a lag in funding and in the events that are happening, or if it will in fact rebound in 2023 with the rest of the globe.
So you touched on the fact that not so bad in Europe. In order to give us a relativities, how does that compare to the US in terms on a year-on-year percentage? And do we have a sense of why Europe's behaved differently to the US?
Sure. The US had a decline of 44%. So on the global average was higher than the global average. Of course, 44 compared to 12%, Europe fared better. Why is that the case? That is really, Galen Growth, we believe that it's really the case because of the European funding by the governments. A lot of digital health funding is early stage and Series A funding that comes from government entities. really grants and other programs. And that funding remained constant through the pandemic and through 2021. So they're less reliant on the venture capital, which took a big hit, and the government funding remained.
Cool. Okay, so let's watch that with interest as we move into 2023 and see whether that resilience is maintained or whether we will start seeing a divergence between Europe and the US. Certainly in the US, we've seen some encouraging economic numbers in the past few weeks, so we'll see. And of course, that next iteration of visibility is either through the platform, so anyone who's got an account or subscription to HealthTech Alpha can monitor those numbers on a month-by-month basis. And so we would encourage people to do that, to be able to keep their finger on the pulse. One of the interesting topics that usually pops up when we look at Europe is, of course, the competitiveness that exists between various ecosystems in Europe, and each one of them, of course, is a different type of dynamic. Let's start with the obvious one, which is when we look at the ranking of European countries by funding total into digital health as defined by Gallup Growth. I noticed that this year, 2022, we saw France romp ahead of the UK, which is an unusual status. So what does that really look like? And importantly, I guess, what's been some of the drivers that means France is ahead?
Yeah, that was a bit of the shock in 2022 is really that that France overtook the United Kingdom in digital health funding. What you see is it's not, they didn't increase by leaps and bounds. We're talking about 200,000 over the UK, but UK usually is far ahead of the rest of the European countries. Really, France increased funding by about 40% last year, whereas the UK decreased by 41%, right? So the UK kept about with the global average, whereas France really jumped ahead. That is surprising because France has about half of the number of ventures that the United Kingdom has, right? In the UK, there are more than 800 ventures in digital health, whereas in France you have closer to 450, right? So there is a big difference in the ecosystem there. Now, France had very much a huge boost with the Dr. Lip deals in 2022, right? The 550 million boost, it does a lot for the French ecosystem as far as digital health. So that had a lot to do with it. What was very interesting and what we're really keeping an eye on is Germany, because with the DiGA system, or the DiGA what would we say, reimbursement system,
the framework.
what we would expect to see, right, the boost in digital health there, at least for the prescription digital health side. And in fact, Germany only saw a decrease of about 15% in the digital health funding. So can't really say it's conclusive, it did or did not, but there's definitely a softening of the impact of that 2021 coming off the pandemic funding. Right, so we're keeping an eye on it, seeing what happens in 2023 as the DiGAs continue to ramp up. But we hope as well that France and Ireland, Belgium then will join that as they develop their own digital reimbursement for digital health ventures.
Yeah, no, we're watching that with interest. As we know, DiGA comes up regularly in conversation with our subscribers and other large organizations we talk to on the weekly basis, and it often becomes a filter in terms of which ventures should we be looking at, and does that reimbursement pathway actually make a difference in terms of the selection criteria. I guess people looking for proof points again, which has been our theme now since midway last year, as we saw the tide change in funding. So let's switch our attentions to what I would describe the details that really matter when we look at the digital health ecosystems. More specifically, today, let's look at therapeutic areas and let's look at digital health clusters as defined by the HealthTech Alpha taxonomy for digital health. So what are some of the highlights then? Because I'm assuming it's not all, everything's gone down. So what's some of the highlights when we look at that?
You're right, not everything has gone down. Now, if we look by therapeutic area, right, oncology stayed on top. Right, it was the #1 in 2021, remained the #1 therapeutic area in 2022. Still experienced an incredible decrease in funding over 2021, but it stayed #1. It's not a typo. When you go oncology and mental health, went from #3 to #2. So that remained in the top 3. And then you had geriatrics, which I had to do a double take when I saw the numbers, to be honest. But in fact, in France and in Germany, there's a lot of attention going into the population health management, the home health care, right? Getting those patients out of the hospitals earlier into the home, and digital solutions that can really help them be at home and stay safe and stay healthy at home, right? So the geriatrics really did jump by over 2,000%, we'll say, to get almost 500 million in funding for those ventures. Right, so that's what happened by the therapeutic areas. And then jumping over to the right, the digital health clusters, right? Galen Gross has a very strict taxonomy of digital health clusters and categories, what we consider in and out of digital health. The health services search went up by 183%, and that's where you find the Dr. Lib venture. So we will attribute most of that increase to Dr. Lib deals, as well the population health management. Again, where you have the geriatrics ventures are mostly in the home health care coordination, in the population health management. So that explains why those two clusters, in fact, did excel in 2022, whereas the rest of them saw a decrease that was similar to the global decrease.
Okay, we'll come back to one of those points in a little while. Let's switch gears and look at partnerships. A great number of digital ventures are B2B2P models. Scaling to reach patients does require a partnership or a partner. So we've looked at funding and we've seen the trend there. Have we seen, I guess, this critical activity that is partnerships between digital ventures and corporations, or even between themselves? Have we seen that slow down in Europe last year?
Absolutely not. That's a very encouraging point that we saw, and which makes us think that yes, the funding has come down, is an indication of what everyone was afraid of, any sort of impending global recession. That was a deal, but the interest in digital health has remained, right? And we're coming back to kind of a normal steady state with the pandemic funding spree, then coming back to the steady state. Partnerships, actually, we documented about 150 partnerships in 2021, 2022. We're talking about Europe here, 2022, we're coming back to something like, my board is over that, something about 290, right? 240, 290 in Europe. So a significant increase in the number of partnerships. Those partnerships, 74% of them were corporate partnerships, right? 26% were venture to venture. And 35% of the corporate partnerships that we're looking at were with pharma biotech genomics companies, right? So they took the biggest piece of the pie there as far as partnering with digital health ventures. As you mentioned, Julien, really a pathway for a venture to get their solutions into the market. So it's very encouraging to see the number of partnerships going up. It is,
and I guess now we're starting to get as we go through your data today, we're starting to get a sense of some of the anchor points of what I would describe, I guess, as the health status of digital health across Europe. So we've seen that funding decelerated, but it's not as severe as it has been in other regions, like the US, for example. We've seen that partnerships are up 1.7x, I think you said, so substantially increased. And we have seen that some clusters and some therapeutic areas have seen a positive uptick in funding. So it's looking, as you say, it's looking like there's been a fair bit of resilience in digital health in Europe over the past 12 months, which is promising news as we move forward to 23. And we'll come back to 23 in a while. But what I wanted to ask you is, if we drill into sort of digital health venture activity itself, and we look at two aspects. One is funding strength. So one of the proof points that we look for when we look at digital health ventures in any detail is when was the last time they raised funding? And of course, at some stage, of course, we look at how long ago was it, because of course there's a correlation with burn. So the question to you is, what does funding strength look like in Europe? Because I was getting a bit concerned last year when the music stopped. And I guess combined with that is where we've seen the most impact from a funding deceleration if we look at the life cycle of ventures.
Both very good questions, because like you said, that funding strength, we can take all the ventures that we have in Europe and understand, okay, which ones of them have raised funding, right? What's the frequency at which they're raising funding, and when are they going to need to raise that funding again, right? When are they going to run out of cash in general? So looking at the frequency, we can look by different funding stages, right? The ones that have just raised their last funding round, where was it? If we look at the Series B and C ventures, right? The ones who the last funding raise was a Series B or Series C. Really, that those growth stage ventures in Europe, 59% of them have raised funding in the last 18 months. What does that mean? That means 41% have not raised funding in the last 18 months. In a growth stage of a venture, that starts to become very critical that they do have the capital to continue growing, right? They're not the late stage yet. They don't have lots of products on the market. They're really expanding their first products, and they need to make sure that they continue to get funding. Now, going back up and saying, okay, if we look at the growth stage ventures here, and then we look at the stages of funding that happened in 2022, right? 2022, the growth stage ventures really, they both decreased compared to 2021, right? So that's where funding is really taking a step backwards, the growth in late stage ventures, whereas what you see is the early stage ventures and the Series A ventures, they actually, the early stage remained about constant, came back a little bit. The Series A ventures excelled in 2022, right? So that's where you see, okay, yeah, the growth late stage funding is tuning down, but there's still 41% of ventures who haven't raised in the last 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to see that there's going to be some critical, perhaps in German we say Engpässe, but some critical points in those ventures in their life stage, right? And that sets it up for what we'll talk about later, our mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah, I mean, listen, 2023 is going to see, I think, an acceleration as far as getting growth at this point of view is concerned, acceleration and maturity of digital health across the globe. But I mean, specifically, if we look at Europe today, I think we will see that acceleration going forwards from a cottage industry to something that's much more, let's say, relevant to healthcare systems and the key stakeholders in healthcare. If I look at our report and I look at 2022, I know that there were no IPOs. There's a complete drought of IPOs in Europe in digital health in 2022. I mean, it wasn't much better elsewhere, but Europe registered a 0. So what does that mean for exit activity then? Is it really being just nothing?
Well, with the financial markets that you had, right, we saw, unless you got that IPO in the first couple of months of the year, the valuations dropped, and I think many ventures just didn't want to. Globally, there was definitely an IPO drought, other than a few SPACs that, like I said, squeezed in at the beginning of the year. What we and what you see in the graphic on the right, shows that the 2020-21 IPO SPAC activity is absolutely gone in 2022. What is increasing are the mergers and acquisitions, right? We saw incredible jump in acquisition activity. Has a lot to do with, you have a lot of ventures in Europe that are maturing, right? They've been around for a while, they've gotten funding, and they're getting to a maturity point where they need to expand. A lot of it's expanding their portfolio, expanding to new markets, right? So they're ready to acquire. And with the lack of funding, those growth stage ventures who have some proof points, right? They're not able to grow. And so it's the perfect storm, right, for the acquisition. The mature companies come acquire the younger ventures that are missing the funding. Now, across the globe, we've seen 60% of those acquisitions. It's a growing percentage, but in 2022, 60% of acquisitions were venture to venture.
True.
Right. So, and that we expect to keep growing.
I was going to say, I think we will expect to see venture to venture M&A activity to continue to maintain large share, I think, of M&A activity going forwards. We shouldn't lose from sight the fact that I think the latest reports say that pharmacos are sitting on $1.4 trillion of cash, which they need to deploy. I think we'll only see a small, tiny percentage of that being deployed digital health. I think most of them are still looking at biotech as their hunting ground. But we also know that health systems are needing to find a way of being more productive, greater capacity, particularly with labor costs going through the roof, and therefore digital health playing a role there. Let's dig into one of the categories, the clusters, as defined by the Health Tech Alpha taxonomy. More specifically, population health management, which, as you described, had a substantial uptick of 374% year on year, 22 versus 21. So let's look behind that number. So a couple of questions for you, I guess. One is, what are the highlights in Europe? How does Europe break down? If you look at that 374 as an aggregate number, how does it break down, looking at it through the lens of the European ecosystems? And then I'd also like to dig into one specific venture that we showcase in the report, and that is Sara, or Kira, CERA, which is a UK population health management digital venture, and understand a bit more why that particular venture was attractive in 2022.
Gladly. Let's look at that. Jumping into population health management. First of all, it's one of our health tech clusters, and that's comprised of three different categories. The first being corporate health, which are your employee health programs, care coordination, moving the patient into the home, getting them everything coordinated in the home, and home health care. So those are the three clusters within population health management, and therein is a lot of the geriatrics care that we talked about earlier. Now, looking across the volume of ventures, where are the ventures located? Germany hosts 18%, UK hosts 27%, right? So those are the two big players in population health management, followed closely by France and Finland. But as far as the funding goes, again, we talked about some of those, Sara is one of the top performers in the UK, but France and Germany took a big piece of the pie as well, right? So it was quite a bit, quite distributed across Europe. And that's what then we're thinking about, okay, this is a cluster that really touches a lot of the European ecosystem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump out of my presentation real quick and jump into that Sara profile on the Health Tech Alpha platform, if my computer will let me. Let's see, if I type in Sara here, you can see within Health Tech Alpha that we jump into the profile. And why we highlighted this venture, first of all, because their funding that they had in 2022, really, we're looking at their peer group, the whisker plot here of their peer group, they far outperformed their peer group, right? So they're a venture that really stood out in 2022 to us. Who are they? We talked about their home health care, disease management in the field of geriatrics, and they were incorporated in the United Kingdom, right? Focused on the patient solution for patients. But what you see is here, we talk the financial strength of them, and the venture signals are proprietary analytics for scaling growth. This is how we understand the strengths and the weaknesses of a particular venture. The alpha score, so alpha score is a maturity. So it's quite a mature venture, and that's really has a lot to do with their funding strength, and then their team. They have a very experienced team leading the Sara venture, right? As well, their partnerships, right? If we look at the partnerships they've made, developed over the past years, they are quite strong within different ecosystems. Okay, so this is their profile within Health Tech Alpha. Encourage anyone to sign up for a basic account. You can also do a free pro trial and get more information on this venture or other ventures across the globe.
Yeah, they're quite a mature company, though, aren't they? Judging
Yeah.
by the size in terms of employees, etc.
Absolutely.
So interesting to watch this one closely. Whilst I was going to say, whilst we're in Health Tech Alpha, looking, you mentioned partnerships. The report tells everyone that a number of partnerships signed, 1.7x last year, etc. One of the most prolific, I mean, the dominant sector in terms of partnerships was pharma and biotech in Europe. So if we then look at that one level down again, we see that AstraZeneca was the most prolific partnership builder in Europe last year. Can we have a quick look at what Health Tech Alpha tells us about AstraZeneca's portfolio?
Absolutely. I have already filtered for AstraZeneca,
Cool.
just so we save a little bit of time. And looking into then the AstraZeneca portfolio, right, that we have on the
Health Tech Alpha,
Health Tech Alpha platform. You can see already in 2023, they've already announced 3 partnerships, right?
Okay.
So they were quite prolific in 2022, continuing that spree in 2023. So we'll be excited to check on them in the H1 report. But looking at their portfolio, that is actually quite global. If they're spreading out between Europe, US, and the Middle East and APAC, right? So it's a very impressive portfolio that they're starting to build in Health Tech Alpha. And we look down here, 120 partnerships have been recorded.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the largest, most prolific partnership builders for the top 20, among the top 20 pharmacos. And for those of you on the webinar wondering how they rank versus their peers, I strongly recommend you download our Pharmaceutical Digital Health Innovation Index report, which we published last November. Again, it's free to download on our research page. We are about out of time here, Sarah. Currently no questions, which means that you're obviously making the information very clear to everyone. I don't want to leave this call without talking about clinical evidence and regulatory filings, largely because, as we mentioned a little bit earlier on, and we keep mentioning every time we talk to anyone about digital health, the days of great stories and FOMO funding are behind us. We're finally in an era of proof points. And one of the proof points, of course, is clinical evidence. In other words, can the digital venture actually demonstrably show that it can do what it claims to be doing medically? Not appropriate to every single digital venture, but certainly appropriate to some clear clusters, such as, for example, DTX. So very quickly, can you give us a flavor of clinical evidence in Europe as it stands as at the end of last year?
Absolutely. And like you said, within Health Tech Alpha, we do track all of that, all of the evidence that we have. We have what we call the evidence signal, and that's comprised of clinical studies, and it's comprised of regulatory filings and peer-reviewed publications. Right, so evidence signal greater than 40 means, hey, they have at least one of those 3. And really what we find within Europe, kind of what you expect, medical diagnostics, patient solutions, remote devices, they take the top 3 spots as in what percentage of the ventures in that particular cluster do have evidence of their product, that it does work for patients. So Europe really, going down to the table, Europe is one of the hard hitters as far as percentage of ventures with evidence signal greater than 40, tied with the US, and just one tick below the Middle East, who is the front runner. We can look specifically into the regulatory filings across the globe, and what we see is, in fact, for the European ventures, the regulatory filings, 33% of them, so about a third of the pie, were taken by wellness solutions. And another 25% by medical diagnostics. So in fact, in 2022, those wellness solutions did jump up as far as the regulatory filings. So it's an very interesting picture across Europe to understand which ones of those ventures are pushing hard to get the regulatory filings. If we look at it, there were about the same number of regulatory filings in 2022 as 2021. So that means we're not going backwards, right? They're pushing forward, but most of them need those partnerships that we talked about earlier in order to generate the evidence, right? You can't run a clinical trial unless you have the backing of someone with the funding for it.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. There ends our 30-minute snapshot of digital health key trends deep dive in the European region. Of course, it's only a snapshot of the full report. Strongly recommend you download a free of charge version if you have not done so already. And that is obviously free of charge to all our HTA subscribers. There's a question from Giulio Zuanetti. You showed 120 partnerships with AstraZeneca, not sure during which of the time interval, saying it is prolific. What would be a median number of partnerships for a classic big pharma?
Then good question. Would highly suggest you download the report that Julien was just talking about. Go to healthtechalpha.com, download that Pharma Digital Health Innovation Index. Because if we look at big pharma, you have the top 10. Well, only about, what do we say, 20 pharma companies have more than 11 partnerships that they've developed, right? It's a very steep curve, but the top hitters, the top 3, Roche, Novartis, AstraZeneca, there may be 1 or 2 in there, they're hitting around 80 to 100 partnerships, right? So you have the big guys who are doing a lot of partnerships, and then it falls off very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, Giulio, I certainly recommend download the report. You'll get far more detail than what we can share with you now. But just bear in mind, 13 pharmacos are accountable for 50% of all digital venture partnerships across the globe. So you can imagine there's a very long tail of pharmacos who have less than 10 partnerships, or less than 10 partnerships with 10 distinct digital ventures around the world, which means that your median will drop very fast. Thank you for that. Any final questions? Please feel free to type them up and share them with us. We will endeavor to answer them quickly now. Otherwise, as I said, this is just a snapshot of the full report, and it is just one of 5 reports. You will find the same level of deep dive and detail for Asia Pacific, Middle East, including Israel, Europe, North America, and South America, available for free to download on our website. All of this is powered by Health Tech Alpha. You got a very quick look at it today. For those who are not familiar with it, please feel free to create your own free account and to navigate around the platform to see its breadth and its depth. And if there are no further questions, we thank you all very much for joining us today and for your questions. And we wish you a great rest of your day.
Thank
you.
Bye.